The world was still picking up the pieces from World War II when a new shadow fell across the globe. A shadow not of bombs and bullets, but of suspicion, fear, and an ideological clash that would define a generation. This was the Cold War, a silent battle between two superpowers that nearly brought the world to its knees. Well, tonight we're going to dig into one of the biggest messes of the 20th century, the Cold War. Now, you might be thinking, another history lesson? Not tonight. But trust me, this isn't your granddad's history lesson. This is about how the world nearly went up in smoke. Not once, but twice. This is about spies, nukes, and two superpowers locked in a staring contest that could have ended us all. We'll start from the rubble of World War II, a time when the world was supposed to be putting itself back together. Instead, it got split in two like a bloody apple sliced down the middle. On one side you had the Americans waving the flag of democracy and capitalism. On the other, the Soviets with their red banners and promises of a workers' paradise. Sounds simple enough, right? Two different ideas about how the world should work. But this wasn't just a disagreement over tea and biscuits. This was a standoff that lasted nearly 50 years, filled with enough tension to power 1,000 light bulbs. And it all started with a fundamental misunderstanding. Tonight, we're going to delve into the dark heart of the Cold War. It's a story filled with more twists and turns than a London back alley, and by the end you'll understand why this wasn't just a war of words, but a war that shaped the world we live in today. Now, to understand this mess, we need to get to know the two men in charge. On the American side, you had Harry S. Truman, a straight-talking fellow from Missouri who found himself in the Oval Office after Roosevelt passed away. Truman was a no-nonsense sort, saw the world in black and white, and wasn't afraid to flex America's muscles. On the other side of the ring, you had Joseph Stalin. Now, this man was a different breed altogether. Cold, calculating, and with a mustache that could make a walrus jealous. Stalin ruled the Soviet Union with an iron fist, and he had a vision for spreading communism across the globe. Now, these two weren't exactly pen pals. During the war, they'd managed to put their differences aside to fight the Nazis, but that alliance was as shaky as a three-legged stool. Deep down, they distrusted each other, and their ideologies were like oil and water. And that's where the seeds of the Cold War were sown. You see, as World War II wound down, both sides started carving up Europe like a Sunday roast. The Soviets wanted to create a buffer zone of friendly communist states in Eastern Europe to protect themselves from future invasions. The Americans, on the other hand, wanted to spread democracy and capitalism, and they saw the Soviet expansion as a threat. The stakes were higher than a kite in a hurricane. Europe was in ruins, millions were dead, and the world was looking for leadership. But instead of cooperation, we got competition. Instead of rebuilding, we got a bloody arms race. And instead of peace, we got a Cold War that lasted for decades. But the question remains, why? Why did this conflict happen? Why couldn't these two superpowers find a way to coexist? Well, that's where things get really interesting. Right then, let's get down to brass tacks. Why did this Cold War actually kick off? Well, as with most things in life, it wasn't just one thing. It was a perfect storm of misunderstandings, suspicions, and deep-rooted differences. First and foremost, you had the clash of ideologies. The Americans, with their belief in democracy and free markets, saw communism as a direct threat to their way of life. They saw communism, with its state control and lack of freedoms, as a direct threat to their way of life. Now, the Soviets weren't exactly singing Kumbaya either. They saw the Americans as greedy capitalists, exploiting the working class and propping up puppet regimes around the globe. They genuinely believed that communism was the answer to the world's problems, and they were determined to spread it, by hook or by crook. But it wasn't just a clash of ideas, mind you. There was a deep-seated mistrust between the two sides. The Soviets hadn't forgotten the Western intervention during their civil war, and the Americans were still wary of Stalin's brutal regime. The lack of trust between the two sides manifested in an escalating arms race. Both sides were stockpiling nuclear weapons, each trying to outdo the other in a terrifying game of one-upmanship. The Cuban Missile Crisis in '62, for instance, brought us to the brink of nuclear war, and it's a bloody miracle we came out the other side unscathed. But there's more to the story. The Soviets' takeover of Eastern Europe after the war set alarm bells ringing in the West. The Americans saw it as a blatant land grab, a violation of the agreements made at Yalta and Potsdam. To counter this, they came up with the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan, aimed at containing communism and rebuilding Western Europe. This only deepened the divide between the two. Let's not forget the personalities involved. Truman and Stalin were like chalk and cheese. Truman, blunt and outspoken; Stalin, secretive and paranoid. They barely tolerated each other during the war, and their relationship soured even further afterward. Their personal animosity only fueled the flames of the conflict. Of course, there were economic factors at play too. The Soviets, with their centrally planned economy, were competing with the capitalist West for resources and influence. This led to a series of proxy wars, from Korea to Vietnam, where both sides fought through their allies, adding fuel to the fire. So there you have it. The Cold War wasn't a simple misunderstanding. It was a complex web of interconnected factors, each one feeding into the other, creating a conflict that shaped the course of the 20th century. Now, I'm no Nostradamus, but the Cold War's impact is far from over. It shaped the geopolitical landscape we live in today, and its echoes can still be heard in the tensions between Russia and the West. It's a reminder that even the mightiest empires can be brought to their knees by fear, mistrust, and a failure to understand the other side. So, there you have it. The Cold War, a conflict born out of fear, mistrust, and a fundamental clash of ideologies. It wasn't just about nukes and spies, though those certainly played their part. It was about two vastly different ways of seeing the world, each convinced it was the right one. But even though the Cold War officially ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, its ghost still haunts us today. The tensions between Russia and the West, the ongoing conflicts in places like Ukraine and Syria, the rise of China as a global power, these are all in one way or another echoes of that decades-long standoff. But perhaps the most chilling legacy of the Cold War is the reminder that the world came within a hair's breadth of nuclear annihilation. It's a sobering thought, isn't it? That the fate of humanity could have been decided by a few men in smoke-filled rooms, playing a high-stakes game of poker with the most dangerous weapons ever created. So, what can we learn from this? Well, for starters, it's a reminder that dialogue, even with those we disagree with, is essential. It's a reminder that fear and mistrust can lead us down a dangerous path. And it's a reminder that in the end, we're all in this together. We share this planet, and we need to find a way to live on it without blowing each other to kingdom come. So the next time you hear about tensions between nations or see politicians rattling their sabers, remember the lessons of the Cold War. Remember the cost of conflict and the importance of finding common ground. And above all, remember that peace isn't just a nice idea, it's the only option. If you found this journey into history as fascinating as I did, be sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the past. And until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and never stop wondering about how the world got to be the way it is.